Your beige, predictable life just got a $5,000 emergency withdrawal, and now the criminals who orchestrated it know your husband checked the withdrawal location. The smell of burnt toast and stale coffee still clung to the air in our little kitchen, a familiar morning perfume that usually meant routine, predictability. I was stirring my instant oatmeal, staring out the window at the pale, watery sunlight, trying to break through the suburban haze. Life with Mark was solid, if a little beige. We had the mortgage, the sensible sedan, the joint savings account where we diligently tracked every penny toward that mythical early retirement we talked about after too much cheap wine. We were good people, responsible people. Then Sarah called. Sarah, my little sister, was the human equivalent of a glitter bomb, brilliant, chaotic, and prone to spontaneous explosions of drama. She had a knack for finding trouble the way others find four-leaf clovers. Usually, her crises involved questionable boyfriends or rent being due a day before payday. I sighed, wiping a smudge of jam off my pajama top. I loved her fiercely, but every interaction required a mental preload of emotional bandwidth. "Emma, thank God you picked up," she gasped, her voice tight and shaky, miles away from her usual breezy tone. "Sarah, what is it? Are you okay? Where are you?" I leaned against the counter, my heart rate already ticking up a notch. "I'm fine. I'm just not where I'm supposed to be," she whispered, and I could hear the sound of traffic rushing past, loud and fast. "Listen, I need you to do something for me, something big, and you can't tell Mark. You cannot tell Mark anything." Mark was my anchor. He was the keeper of the budget, the one who reminded me about the 401k contributions. Sharing financial news with him was like filing a quarterly tax return, necessary, detailed, and immediate. The thought of hiding something major from him sent a cold spike of dread through me. "Sarah, you know I don't keep secrets from Mark, especially about money. Is this about the loan again? Did you wreck the car?" I pressed, grabbing a pen and notebook out of habit. A long, rattling breath came through the phone. "Worse. So much worse. This isn't about a few $100s, Em. This is serious debt. Like life-ruining debt. I owe people money, and they aren't the kind of people you argue the payment schedule with." My stomach dropped right through the floorboards. Sarah had always played with fire, but this sounded like she'd jumped into an oil refinery. "Who, Sarah? Who do you owe?" "It doesn't matter right now. What matters is that I need a favor that will save my life, and you're the only one who can do it. I need you to transfer $5,000 into my emergency account. It's the only way to buy me 48 hours to fix this mess." $5,000? That wasn't a little loan. That was a significant chunk of our emergency fund. The fund meant for actual emergencies, like Mark losing his job or a medical crisis, not covering debts related to whatever disastrous side hustle Sarah had inevitably started this month. "Sarah, I can't just move $5,000. Mark tracks everything. He checks the balances every Sunday night. He'll know instantly. That's why you can't tell him." Her voice rose in desperation. "Listen to me, Emma. You have to lie. You have to tell him you use the money for something necessary, something big, a surprise for him, a down payment on a new roof, anything. Just give me the money, and I swear on everything holy, I will pay you back with interest before the end of the month. If I don't get this money by noon today, Emma, they're going to hurt me." The threat wasn't veiled. It was sharp, immediate, and terrifying. I looked at the oatmeal, now congealing into a tasteless lump. My sensible life, my beige security, felt suddenly fragile, perched on the edge of a precipice. Sarah's voice cracked again, and I knew she wasn't exaggerating this time. Okay, calm down, I whispered, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I need to think. Where is your emergency account number? I promised her I would figure out the lie. I would figure out the money, but as I hung up the phone, the sheer weight of the deception settled on my chest. I had to look Mark in the eye tonight, pour him a glass of Cabernet, and invent a plausible, large, life-altering expense that didn't exist. The lie was already forming in my mind, ugly and slick, but the question remained. How would I explain the missing funds when the end of the month came and Sarah's promised repayment never materialized? That night, Mark came home early. He didn't usually check the balances until Sunday, but he walked into the kitchen holding his phone, his face unreadable. "Hey, honey," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "I was just looking at the quarterly report from the bank for my mother's trust fund. Just verifying the statements. Keeping tabs on everything." He paused, tilting his head slightly. "Speaking of tracking things, did you happen to notice that the joint savings account balance is looking a little lighter than usual?" My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Mark didn't just glance at statements, he scrutinized them like a forensic accountant. He was looking at the number now. My practice lie, the one about the urgent plumbing repair that somehow required $5,000 in immediate cash and 0 invoices, was still lodged halfway down my throat, tasting like ash. "Lighter?" I managed, forcing a bright, perhaps too bright smile as I tried to casually walk toward him, positioning myself between him and the phone screen. "Oh, yeah. I totally forgot to tell you. Remember that leak we had under the guest bathroom sink last week? The one I called about? Well, the plumber. The one Mark recommended, remember? He said it was worse than we thought. Structural damage. Needed immediate stabilization, or we were looking at mold spreading into the subfloor." Mark lowered the phone slowly, his eyes, usually warm hazel, narrowing with a focused intensity that made me feel like a poorly organized receipt file. He wasn't buying it, but he was processing the information, waiting for the inevitable follow-up question. "Structural damage, huh? That sounds expensive," he said, emphasizing the last word. "Why didn't you call me first? You know the rule, Em. Anything over $200 we consult. $5,000 is not a faucet washer." I know, I panicked. I rushed on, my voice gaining speed as I spun the narrative tighter. The guy was there. The water was actively dripping onto the ceiling drywall in the living room. He said if I waited even an hour, the whole plaster dome would collapse. He insisted on immediate payment via wire transfer because he needed to pay his specialty crew up front. He was very persuasive. I braced for the next blow. Mark was a reasonable man, but he valued transparency above all else. He hated feeling sidelined on major household decisions. "A wire transfer for structural work?" Mark countered, his brow furrowed. "That's highly irregular. Usually they take a check or credit card. Did you get an invoice or an itemized bill at least? Can you show me the name of the plumbing company?" The structural lie was collapsing faster than the imaginary drywall I'd described. I hadn't prepared for paperwork. Sarah had only given me 48 hours, and in that panic, I hadn't thought about creating supporting documentation for a phantom disaster. I think I have the receipt somewhere. It's crumpled up in my purse. It was all cash, Mark. He was old school. Said he prefers immediate settlement for large jobs. I batted my eyelashes weakly, reaching for the emotional lever. "Look, I was terrified, honey. The water damage was starting to creep up the wall. I just reacted. It's done now, and the bathroom is dry. Can we just be relieved the house isn't falling apart instead of grilling me about payment methods?" Mark sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked tired, and for a split second I thought I'd succeeded. He seemed ready to concede defeat for the sake of domestic peace. "Fine, Em. Fine, I trust you. But you need to find that receipt tomorrow, and we are calling that company to verify the work. We need to protect ourselves from fraud. You know how many scams are out there." He dropped his phone onto the counter, the tension easing slightly from his shoulders. "Let's just drop it for tonight. I'm beat. How about we order Thai?" I exhaled so deeply my knees nearly buckled. I had bought myself 24 hours. I sent Sarah a frantic text. "It's done, but he wants a receipt, and you have until tomorrow morning to figure out how to fake one." The evening passed in a nervous haze. I kept glancing at Mark, half expecting him to pull out a magnifying glass and start examining the grout. The Thai food tasted like cardboard. When we went to bed, I clung to him a little too tightly, grateful for the physical closeness that masked the huge, gaping hole of dishonesty now separating us. The next morning, I woke before dawn, heart pounding. I needed to check in with Sarah. She hadn't responded to my late-night text. I crept downstairs, not wanting to wake Mark, and pulled out my phone. Still no reply. An hour later, Mark walked into the living room, fully dressed for work, holding a mug of black coffee. He looked calm, too calm. "Morning," he said, taking a slow sip. "I just got off the phone with my mother's financial advisor. They were finalizing the quarterly review of her holdings." My mouth went dry. Why was he bringing up his mother's trust fund now? "Oh, good," I squeaked. "Did everything look okay?" It did. Actually, it looked fantastic, which is great because it means the advisor had time to look over some other things I asked him about, just out of curiosity. Mark walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up a small framed photo of Sarah and me from our high school graduation, a photo Mark claimed to love because we looked so young and innocent. He turned the photo over in his hands, his gaze fixed on me. He was looking into potential investment opportunities in the regional banking sector. He mentioned how thorough I am about cross-checking financial data, which made me realize something. He took another sip of coffee, his eyes locking onto mine with terrifying clarity. "When I saw the $5,000 withdrawal yesterday, Em, I did a little digging before I let you spin your story. I logged into our primary banking app, the one only I have the direct login for, remember, and checked the transaction history for the last 72 hours. There was no wire transfer, Emma. There was an ATM withdrawal at the downtown branch, made at 10:15 a.m. yesterday. A withdrawal made using my emergency debit card, the one I keep locked in my bedside drawer." The room tilted. The air thickened, suffocating me. My mind scrambled, trying to fit the new, impossible data point into the crumbling facade of my story. Mark's bedside drawer, the emergency card. I hadn't touched that card in years. It was the nuclear option, the one we only used if the main accounts were frozen. "That's impossible, Mark," I heard myself say, the words sounding distant and high-pitched, like someone else was speaking through my mouth. "I told you it was a wire transfer," the plumber insisted. "I didn't use any debit card. I don't even know where your emergency card is half the time." Mark didn't argue the point. He simply walked over to the nightstand in our bedroom, which was still open from where he'd retrieved his coffee mug earlier. He reached inside the small, locked compartment, the one that required a thumbprint and a 4-digit code that only he knew, and pulled out the sleek black emergency debit card. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger, letting it dangle. "I only checked the transactions after you mentioned the plumbing issue, Em. I wanted to see the wire confirmation number, but there was no wire. Just this withdrawal. $5,000, cash, pulled from an ATM 10 blocks from your sister's apartment building, precisely 1 hour after she called you begging for money. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the whirring of the refrigerator compressor. The lie hadn't just failed. It had backfired spectacularly, leading Mark directly to the truth I was trying to protect Sarah from. "Mark, please, just let me explain the ATM part," I pleaded, stepping toward him, my hands outstretched in surrender. "It's not what you think. Sarah—" "No, Emma, don't tell me it's not what I think." He cut me off, his voice dangerously level, devoid of the usual warmth. It was the voice he used when dealing with a complex legal dispute. Cold, precise, and utterly unforgiving. "I know exactly what happened. You lied to me about the method of payment, which suggests you were worried I'd trace the destination. So I traced it." He walked back into the living room and picked up his phone again, this time opening a different app, a secure login portal I hadn't seen before. "When you didn't respond to my texts yesterday afternoon after I went to the office, I got worried. Not about the plumbing, but about you. I decided to call Sarah myself. I needed to confirm that she was okay after that scary phone call you described." My breath hitched. I hadn't anticipated this move. Sarah, under pressure, was a terrible liar. "And what did she say?" I whispered, bracing myself for Sarah's panicked confession. Or worse, her denial that she had ever spoken to me. Mark looked up from the screen, his expression shifting from cold anger to something closer to utter confusion, mixed with dawning horror. "That's the thing, Emma. I called her cell phone, then her work line, then her apartment, all unanswered. So I did what I probably shouldn't have, but felt compelled to do. I logged into the shared cloud storage we set up for family photos, because she sometimes uploads stuff there. I was looking for a recent picture of her, thinking maybe that would confirm she was physically somewhere." He paused, his eyes wide, as if reading something unbelievable on the screen. "She hasn't logged into that shared drive in 6 months, Em. But there was a new file uploaded 3 days ago. It's a PDF, a financial disclosure." Mark tapped the screen, turning the phone toward me. It wasn't an invoice or a plea for money. It was a formal, stark document titled Declaration of Irrevocable Trust, Dissolution and Asset Transfer. "What is that?" I choked out, leaning in to read the dense legal jargon. "It's Sarah's trust fund paperwork, the one established by our Aunt Clara before she passed away last year," Mark explained slowly, his voice losing its hard edge, replaced by disbelief. "The one Sarah always claimed was locked up and inaccessible until she turned 35, the one she always said she needed your signature on as a witness to access any part of?" My knees were weak. I remembered signing that document months ago, thinking it was a procedural formality, a signature on a dusty piece of paper that had no bearing on our daily lives. But she said she needed $5,000 to pay people off, to stop them from hurting her. Mark stared at the document on his phone, then back at me, his face pale. The disclosure states that the remaining assets, nearly $1.2 million, were liquidated and transferred yesterday morning to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The transfer was authorized by Sarah as beneficiary and finalized at 9:45 a.m. yesterday. My eyes darted between the phone and Mark. Sarah hadn't needed $5,000 to buy time. She had needed $5,000 to facilitate a massive illegal transfer, and I was the unwitting accomplice who provided the cash withdrawal confirmation, the perfect distraction, while she walked away with everything. "Mark," I whispered, trying to stop the sudden wave of nausea rising in my throat, If she liquidated the trust yesterday morning, then why did she call me yesterday begging for $5,000 when she clearly had over $1 million? Before Mark could answer, my own phone, sitting on the kitchen counter, buzzed violently with an incoming call. The caller ID flashed, "Unknown number." Curiosity, or perhaps a desperate need for confirmation of Sarah's wickedness, compelled me to answer. "Hello?" The voice on the other end wasn't Sarah's. It was deep, metallic, and dangerously calm. "Mrs. Henderson, thank you for cooperating yesterday. The $5,000 was necessary for us to verify the system access point. Your sister is currently quite safe and aboard a flight to a location she can't be traced from. And as for Mr. Henderson..." The voice paused, a soft, chilling chuckle echoing through the line. He shouldn't have looked at the emergency card transaction history, should he? Because now we know exactly where to find you. The metallic voice hung in the air between Mark and me, each syllable a poisoned dart hitting the fragile remains of our morning calm. Mark's hand shot out, grabbing my arm, his eyes wide with alarm as he registered the caller's final, terrifying words. "Who was that, Emma? What did they say?" he demanded, pulling me closer to him, his gaze sweeping the familiar, safe confines of our kitchen as if expecting assassins to rappel through the skylight. I couldn't speak. My throat was locked. I could only hold the phone away from my ear, the tinny, echoing silence on the line more horrifying than any threat. I finally dropped the device onto the wooden floor where it clattered, the call disconnecting with a soft beep. They knew. I finally stammered, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. They knew about the ATM withdrawal. They knew you checked the card. They aren't just after Sarah's money, Mark. They used the money I gave Sarah as a test, a proof of concept. Mark stared at the silent phone, then at the trust dissolution document still displayed on his own screen. The missing $1.2 million, the sudden, untraceable exit of my sister, and now this direct threat aimed at us. "They used the $5,000 you withdrew as collateral, Emma," Mark stated, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive despite the terror. "It was a transactional breadcrumb. If they confirmed you were willing to break the rules and provide immediate cash on Sarah's instruction, they knew you were compromised and could be leveraged later. That ATM withdrawal wasn't for Sarah to escape, it was for them to confirm your compliance." The room seemed to shrink. Sarah hadn't been running from debt collectors. She had been running with organized criminals, and I had just played the role of the loyal patsy, draining our liquid savings to signal my cooperation. "But why lie about the plumbing?" I whispered, shaking my head in bewildered anguish. "Why not just say you needed cash fast? Why involve us in a fake plumbing disaster?" "Because a plumber needing immediate cash for structural work is a solvable problem, Emma. It's a domestic issue that can be fixed with an invoice and a stern talking to," Mark said grimly. "But taking money from an emergency fund for a sibling's vague, dangerous debt? That looks like desperation or loyalty overriding sense. It's messy, and messy makes you vulnerable. They needed you to be messy." We stood there, trapped in the morning light, realizing that the quiet, predictable life we had built was built on sand, and Sarah's disastrous choices had just brought the tide in. "We have to call the police," I insisted, reaching for the landline. Mark caught my wrist again, his grip firm. "And tell them what, Em? That your sister stole over $1 million from a trust fund, wired it offshore, and somehow your withdrawal of $5,000 for a fabricated plumbing emergency made you an accessory to their theft. They'll look at us, Emma. They'll see the lie about the plumbing, the missing cash, and the fact that we only noticed the major transfer after Sarah disappeared. We look like we were in on the exit strategy. The implication was devastating. If we went to the police, we implicated ourselves in fraud, even if unintentionally. Suddenly, Mark's face went ashen. He stepped away from me, moving toward the front door where his briefcase sat waiting. "Wait, where are you going?" I asked, panic tightening my chest. "I'm going to work," he said, his voice strained. "I have to access the secure servers at the firm. I need to run deep background checks on every name associated with Aunt Clara's trust documentation. And I need to see if there's any movement related to that Cayman account that I can track outside of standard banking channels." "Mark, you can't just walk out of here. That person on the phone, they threatened us. And if I stay here arguing about which government agency to call, we give them more time to isolate us," he countered, pulling his jacket on with sharp, jerky movements. He looked back at me, his eyes blazing with a terrifying mixture of resolve and fear. "I need access to my network, Emma. I need to figure out who they are before they show up at our door. Stay inside. Don't answer the door for anyone, no matter what they say. Don't even open the blinds. I'll be back as soon as I can, and we'll figure out how to clean up this absolute mess Sarah made." He grabbed his keys and was gone, the heavy deadbolt snapping shut behind him with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. I stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the faint sound of his sensible sedan pulling out of the driveway. I obeyed him instantly. I locked all the doors, drew the heavy drapes, and retreated to the living room, turning off the lights. The house plunged into a tense, manufactured twilight. I checked my phone again, hoping for a message from Mark or even a sign of life from Sarah. Nothing. I sat on the couch, gripping a decorative pillow, trying to regulate my breathing. 10 minutes passed, 20. The silence was oppressive. Then I heard it. A faint sound from outside the house near the back patio doors. It wasn't the sound of a car or footsteps on the pavement. It was a metallic scraping sound, rhythmic and slow, coming from the direction of the meticulously kept vegetable garden Mark was so proud of. It sounded like someone was digging or perhaps cutting through something. I held my breath, straining to hear over the frantic pounding of my own heart when the scraping suddenly stopped, replaced by a dull, heavy thud. Then a shadow fell across the edge of the curtain near the sliding glass door, a shape too tall and too still to be a passing neighbor, and I saw, pressed against the glass, not a face, but a single dark object resting against the pane, illuminated faintly by the weak morning light filtering through the edges of the drape. A small, crude, wooden birdhouse Sarah and I had made in second grade, now defaced with thick, drying streaks of crimson. The sight of that defaced birdhouse, a relic of childhood innocence now smeared with what I instantly knew wasn't paint, snapped something inside me. This wasn't just about money or lies anymore. This was a direct, terrifying message delivered to my doorstep while Mark was scrambling for professional help. They weren't waiting for Mark to investigate. They were escalating the threat against me, the vulnerable link. I scrambled backwards off the couch, tripping over the coffee table, my mind screaming, "Don't panic! They want a reaction. They want me to run." Mark's words echoed. Don't answer the door for anyone, no matter what they say. I stayed low, crawling toward the hallway closet where we kept the emergency kit, a battered metal box that held flares, first aid supplies, and crucially, the small, unregistered hunting pistol Mark kept for home defense, a necessity he always joked was only for scaring off aggressive squirrels. As I fumbled with the latch on the metal box, the scraping sound started again at the patio door, more insistent this time, followed by a dull thwack against the glass. They were testing the door, testing my resolve. I found the pistol, cold and heavy in my trembling hands. It felt alien, dangerous. I knew how to load it thanks to Mark's infrequent safety drills, but I had never once aimed it at another human being. Just as I chambered around, the silence outside was broken by a new sound. Not scraping, but the distinct authoritative blast of a police siren in the distance, growing rapidly louder. It was Mark. He hadn't gone to the office. He must have realized the immediate danger and called the authorities before going anywhere near his work network. The pounding on the back door stopped instantly. The heavy, predatory shadow outside vanished. I waited, gun raised, listening to the sirens scream past our house, turn around the block, and then slow to a stop right in front of our driveway. I didn't dare move from my defensive position. I heard shouting outside, official voices commanding someone to show their hands. Then a familiar voice, strained and ragged, cut through the chaos. "Emma, it's me, it's Mark. Open up, I'm with the police." Relief hit me so violently that my knees buckled. I dropped the gun. It skittered across the hardwood floor and stumbled to the front door, throwing the deadbolts back. Mark stood there, flanked by two uniformed officers, his face etched with exhaustion and residual terror. Behind him, an officer was carefully examining the defaced birdhouse, carefully bagging it into an evidence container. "Thank God, Emma," Mark choked out, pulling me into a fierce embrace. "I couldn't get a signal on my phone to warn you, so I drove straight to the precinct and reported everything. The threat, the missing cash, Sarah's trust liquidation. They sent a patrol car immediately." The lead officer, a tall woman with weary eyes, stepped forward. "Ma'am, can you confirm you were inside the residence the entire time?" I nodded against Mark's shoulder. "Yes, since about 7:30 this morning. My sister Sarah, she lied to me. She orchestrated this whole thing with some people, and they used the $5,000 to confirm I was their contact." Mark pulled away slightly, pointing to his phone screen, which still displayed the Cayman Island disclosure. "Officer, we have evidence of massive international financial fraud involving a trust fund. We believe Sarah is involved and has fled the country. The threats were clearly made by her associates to intimidate us into silence." The officer took the details quickly, professionally, her demeanor shifting from cautious response to active investigation. As they took our official statements, Mark explained how he had tracked the ATM withdrawal and how the threat suddenly materialized when he focused on tracing the money. Later that afternoon, after the forensics team had swept the property, Mark and I sat huddled on the couch, wrapped in a single blanket, the trauma beginning to set in. "So, what now?" I asked quietly, staring at the sunlight finally streaming through the clean glass of the patio door. The illusion of security was gone forever, replaced by the chilling knowledge that my own sister was capable of betraying me so completely. Mark held my hand tightly, his thumb tracing patterns on my skin. "Now, we cooperate fully. They know Sarah liquidated the assets. That money is flagged now. The international authorities will be involved by morning. We tell them everything. The phone call, the lie, the ATM withdrawal. We prove we were victims leveraged by her new associates." "And Sarah?" Mark's expression hardened, a sadness creeping into his eyes that hadn't been there before the realization of her betrayal. "Sarah made her choice, Emma. She chose a life that involved stealing from her family and aligning with criminals. She didn't just take the money, she put a target on our backs to cover her tracks. She's on the run with a significant amount of illegal capital, and she has people who will ensure she never sees the light of day again if she messes up." He paused, looking at me with a fierce loyalty that erased the memory of the lie. But she made a mistake. She assumed I wouldn't check the card. She assumed you wouldn't tell me the whole truth eventually. She assumed we were weak. She was wrong. We're going to get through this, Emma, together. I leaned my head against his shoulder, the weight of the truth still crushing, but the immediate danger having passed. The police had warned us to expect further contact from Sarah's associates, or perhaps from Sarah herself, desperate to retrieve the stolen funds. We were marked now, tied irrevocably to a criminal network, all because I answered a desperate phone call from the sister I couldn't say no to. As Mark started to describe the complex legal strategy he intended to deploy, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Sarah's number, calling again, not unknown this time. Mark looked at me, his face grim. "Don't answer it," he breathed, but I couldn't resist. I picked up, holding the phone between us, pressing the speaker button. "Hello, Sarah?" I managed. The line crackled, and instead of Sarah's frantic voice, I heard a recording, a perfectly modulated, synthesized voice devoid of emotion. "Transaction complete. Accountability verified. Thank you for your participation in the initial liquidation phase, Emma Henderson. Your cooperation has been noted by the principal investors. Do not attempt to contact Ms. Sarah Dubois again. Any further inquiries will be forwarded to local law enforcement." The recording clicked off, leaving behind only the dial tone. It wasn't a threat. It was a final receipt. Sarah hadn't called us back in desperation. She had simply used her final moments of contact to confirm that her pawns, me and Mark, had played our parts exactly as required, confirming our complicity before disappearing with the fortune. The shock wasn't that she had betrayed me. The shock was realizing that for her I was never family, just a necessary, disposable line item in a very expensive withdrawal.